ultimate thrill in IFR flying is shooting a tight ILS approach and breaking out of the clouds just a few hundred feet above the ground to see the runway numbers right in front of you. It's a magical feeling. Well, one key to making this magic happen is the ability to track the horizontal part of the ILS, which, as you know, is called the localizer. We're about 8 miles east of Gillespie Airport now, so let's tune in their localizer and track it to the airport. We'll do this at 4,500 feet so that we're above their Class Delta airspace and away from the traffic going into and out of the airport. Let's see, the localizer frequency is 110.5 and the identifier is ISEE. So the first thing I'll do is set the localizer frequency in my #1 nav. And then I'll listen to the identifier for a minute. What do you know? That is ISEE. The inbound course on the localizer is 269er, so I'll set that in my OBS just as a reminder of what my inbound course is. There's nothing especially tricky about tracking a localizer, except that since on the average the localizer is about 4 times more sensitive than a VOR, you have to make much smaller corrections. The biggest key to success is to realize that tracking a localizer is simply a refined exercise in holding your heading. You estimate in advance the heading that you think you'll need to correct for the wind and track the localizer. Now this localizer course is 269 degrees and I have a slight wind from the northwest. I'll make sure first that my heading indicator and my magnetic compass agree. They do, so that's okay. And then I'll start out with a 5-degree right wind correction angle for a heading of 274 degrees. Well, we've been talking here. I've gotten myself established on the localizer. Now, once you're on the localizer, you need to fly your heading precisely. So I'll concentrate on flying a heading of exactly 274 degrees. Then you watch what happens to the localizer needle as you fly that heading. If the needle moves, it tells you need to pick a new heading. The key is to choose a heading and fly it. Don't try and chase the needle. Now here's the tricky part. You need to make very, very small heading corrections. In my case, the needle is moving to the right slowly. Now, as soon as you detect any needle movement at all, you need to make a small correction in the direction the needle is moved. Since I'm about 7 miles out now, I'll make about a 4-degree correction to the right. That'll give me a new heading of 278 degrees. As you get closer to the localizer antenna, the corrections have to be even smaller yet. Within 2 or 3 miles of the airport, the same needle movement might only require a degree or so of heading correction. If the needle had moved more rapidly, this far out I might have tried a 6 or 7 degree heading correction. Start with a small correction. And if you don't get the results you want, you can always make another correction in the same direction. The needle is very slowly moving back towards the center, so it looks like my correction was okay. Now the needle is centered, so I'll turn back to the left and use about half my previous correction. I'll turn left 2 degrees, and that will give me a new heading of 276. Now, as I fly along here, I might get distracted and wander off my heading a little bit, or the wind might change some. In fact, I see that I'm a whole 5 degrees off my desired heading. I've been heading 281 instead of 276, and the localizer needle shows it. It's moved to the left by about a dot. So I'll take up a new heading to correct for that. Let's try a 3-degree correction back to course for a heading of 273. As you figured out by now, the trick to tracking a localizer is to make very small corrections sooner instead of bigger corrections later. And the closer you get to the airport, the smaller those corrections need to be. In fact, when you're within about 5 miles of the airport, your correction should be 2 degrees or less. Well, that correction brought the needle back into the center, so now I'll return to my heading of 276 and see how it works. We're about 3 miles from the airport now, so I'll try making 1 degree corrections every time I see the needle move just a little bit. Say, there's the airport. You know, this stuff really does work. Let's keep tracking the localizer beyond the airport. It works just exactly the same as tracking to the airport, except the needle gets less and less sensitive as you fly away from the airport. I've pretty much got the heading I need figured out, so I can just continue making corrections of a degree or 2 when I need to. Well, we're west of the airport now, so I think I'll turn around and get myself established on the localizer, headed back to the airport. I've descended to 3,500 feet now, and I'm established on the localizer, headed back towards the airport. Now, the course this direction is 089er, but I'll leave the OBS set to 269er to remind me that I'm flying the localizer backwards of the way it's primarily intended to be flown. I found a 7-degree wind correction angle worked pretty good going the other way, so I'll try that again, and that'll give me a heading of 082. Now, when you're flying the localizer backwards like this, just about everything is the same. The needle still gets more and more sensitive as you get closer and closer to the airport. But there is just one minor difference, and that difference can be very confusing to pilots. The needle moves in the opposite direction. In other words, instead of turning towards the needle, you turn away from it. I like to think of it as pulling the needle with you. While I've been distracted talking here, I've let my heading drift over to 077, and as a result, the needle's moved off to the left. That tells me I need to turn to the right to pull the needle back to the center. I'll turn past my target heading of 082 to a heading of 086 in order to pull the needle in. Well, that worked, and the needle's centered now. So I'll return to my target heading of 082. Everything is the same from here on out. I'll make smaller and smaller corrections as I fly towards the airport. The only difference is I need to keep in mind that I need to pull the needle back to the center instead of flying towards the needle. Well, there's the airport. But let's continue tracking the localizer to the east of the airport. Now, even though we're back on the approach side of the airport, we still have to pull the needle with us because we're still flying the localizer the opposite direction from the way it's primarily intended to be flown. And once again, as we get further from the airport, the needle becomes less sensitive. Okay, the needle moved to the left just a little bit, so I'll turn a couple of degrees to the right to pull it back. And as you can see, we've got tracking the localizer, both front course and back course, down pat. That's the first step in making approach magic happen.